Welcome to part two of the Supporting Giftedness PD. This particular part is called the Inclusive Classroom. To start with, it's important to address what is an inclusive classroom. Given that we will be talking so much about it, I thought it would be important to define it and to create a general idea of what I mean when I say it. According to the Yale Center for Teaching and Learning, an inclusive classroom climate refers to an environment where all students feel supported intellectually and academically and are extended a sense of belonging in the classroom regardless of identity, learning preferences, or education. For this particular PD, we will be focusing a lot on the all students feel supported intellectually and academically portion of this definition. Some of the benefits of an inclusive classroom include it being a safe space. Given that differences are celebrated in inclusive classrooms, students feel safe and accepted regardless of the different learning, social, emotional, or intellectual preferences that they might have. Similarly, in an inclusive classroom, students are met where they're at. Whether that means because they need more support learning, less support learning, more extension, if they come from different cultural, racial backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, regardless of where a student comes from, an inclusive classroom meets the student where he or she is at. A teacher in an inclusive classroom utilizes the resources available to her, whether that means speech resources in the school, counseling, SPED resources, the gifted specialist in the school, all the resources that a school provides for the teacher. An inclusive classroom teacher makes use of them. As mentioned before, an inclusive classroom celebrates differences and creates well-rounded individuals. When students grow in an environment that is accepting of differences and in which the teacher identifies different ways to help students with different needs, the students grow they grow up with a well-rounded mind because they are taught to problem solve situations that might involve differences in learning. This being said, an inclusive classroom composition, when you define when defining inclusive, it tackles several areas of difference within the classroom community. One of them is students with diverse racial backgrounds. The other is students with diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, diverse learning styles, and diverse academic standing. As you can see on the screen, these different areas of differences between students overlap because every student has some kind of identity regarding these four categories, and therefore their identity as a learner might be defined by more than one of these circles. In terms of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, on the screen you can see a variety of different racial and ethnic IDs that students might identify with. On the bottom, notice that I wrote and more because there might be a variety of more identities that students may identify themselves with. Same with socioeconomic backgrounds. These are the general classifications, but that doesn't mean that a student or his or her family cannot identify with something else. In terms of diverse learning styles, we have visual learners, auditory learners, linguistic learners, and kinesthetic learners. And when we talk about giftedness, it's really important to understand that regardless of the fact that a student is gifted or not, he or she will most definitely have a preference on how they learn and what kind of materials they need and could use in order to better understand the material being presented to them. Finally, in terms of diverse academic standing, which is the circle that we will be focusing on the most, I like to think there's three different levels of academic standing of our learners. First of all, at grade level are students who meet the requirements, test scores, and abilities that are generally identified for that specific grade. So, for example, a student that is in third grade that reads at a third grade level has the math and developmental skills of third grade level, would be considered at level. And then based off of that, below grade level students are students who are struggling with one or more areas of the general developmental needs of that particular grade. And above grade level students are students who have one or more areas in which they are above the grade they are in. It's important to know that although gifted learners are above grade, all gifted learners are above grade level students, um, all above grade level students aren't gifted learners. Some students might be successful academically, but it doesn't mean that they have been formally identified as gifted. Similarly, it's not always the case that gifted students are identified as above grade level because life circumstances or social emotional circumstances might also interfere with their academic standing, unfortunately. So overall, it's just important to think of this whole big picture when addressing an inclusive classroom, and understanding that these different categories often overlap and that all of them have to be taken into account when addressing the needs of students. So now, how does giftedness fit in? Inclusive classroom doesn't only mean supporting students below grade level, but also those above. As mentioned before, giftedness is a part of the above grade level pool of students. Unfortunately, when students are below grade level, teachers provide support to help these students to grade level. And I say unfortunately not because I believe that they shouldn't be supported. I most certainly believe they should. But the issue is that more and more these days we see that this support is provided only to below grade level students, but that extensions are not being provided as thoroughly. It is the teacher's responsibility to extend learning as well for above level students so that they feel challenged. As I mentioned right now, modern day classrooms often fail to provide the extension piece for students. If a student is above grade level, he or she is often left on hold, quotation marks, while struggling students are aided. This shouldn't be the case because gifted and high ability students should also feel challenged at school, and this is done through extensions. In upcoming sessions, we will discuss more ways in which general education teachers can help challenge gifted and high ability students. These are the resources that I used for this session, most specifically the Inclusive Classroom Climate page of the Yale Center for Teaching and Learning. Hope you enjoyed this session, and I will see you in part 3.